long-term 10+ years married couples of Reddit. What was the worst low you've had and why didn't you leave? We have been married over 20 years and had a lot of stress and times when everything around us went wrong. But the lowest point was a time when there was nothing really wrong in our lives, but we grew apart and each of us seemed to feel that the other person was the enemy. But we were able to work our way through it because I think we both knew it was the best option for us both. Do you have suggestions on how to prevent that growing apart things? This is harder because it's not that obvious, right? 125 years relationship here. Go for a walk, sleep in the same bed, talk to each other, do housekeeping together, not one part does it all or SMTH. If you don't talk, if you fight often without talking it out, if you start to spend more of your time alone than with the partner, that's a sign that the relationship is equal as the base of my comment. But I know a lot of people lost the ability to reflect upon themselves, or they just don't take the time to do so. The signs were often obvious afterwards. Why weren't they before? Maybe someone else has other tips for you, but it's not hard to detect when problems emerge. You have to put those problems on the table and not delay them for later. Never. We had ugly situations and we always were in each other's arms within the same hour. Sometimes it needs a 5-10 minute split pause when it is heating up because it gets unproductive at some point. Married 20 years this coming week. Lowest point was when we almost lost the house and had to file bankruptcy. Our daughter was a toddler. My husband had lost his job. My job was not enough to carry everything alone. Money was tight for what seemed like forever. I was angry. He was angry. But we stuck it out. Both of us are children of divorced parents, and we didn't want that for our own daughter or for ourselves. I didn't want a divorce because I trusted him, and after what I had been through in my first marriage, I knew that this marriage was worth fighting to keep. So we kept things back. We drove shit cars for years. We didn't buy new clothes for anyone but our daughter. We applied for as much assistance as we could and found out that even on just my salary we didn't qualify for shit because we only had the one child. We were turned down because I made $126.35 too much. We went on payment plans with the electric company and I found a mechanic that would also allow payments on work done. We are still in our house. We now have cars that don't need repairs every other week. He has been with his company for over 12 years now. The majority of that time has been WFH. Our daughter is graduating high school near the top of her class this spring and is heading to college in the fall. We have taken a few vacations in the last couple of years. We have money in savings and in investments. If either of us had walked away, it would have been disastrous for both of us, but especially for our daughter. It was rough for a good long while, but we are still together. We love each other, and both of us can say without hesitation that we are happily married. Edited here for some more info since some of the responses are questioning why financial issues would cause a person to think of divorce. My first husband started beating and raping me on a regular basis when money got tight. We both had jobs, but he got busted down to PFC because he was an asshole. He left me with no car. He cleaned out our joint bank account, and when he showed back up, he did so with a stripper girlfriend that he moved into our house. He gave her the car. He gave her what money he had. He drank and did drugs with the rest of it. His command and the local Salvation Army did nothing to protect me. I left after my dad had a massive stroke and I wanted to go home. A friend paid for the bus ticket. When my father passed, my ex came up for the service. The day after I buried my dad, his strip girlfriend showed up at my mom's and he left. He went on to get a 17-year-old pregnant. He was 30. He then refused to divorce me for nearly 6 years until I showed up on his mom's doorstep to demand he sign the papers, and then he refused to show up for the court date for the divorce. All I wanted was my maiden name back and to no longer be married to him. He tried to destroy me, and it all started over financial shit. So yeah, job loss is a ducking huge stressor on a marriage, and since I had been there before and gotten the shit beaten out of me, it was extra hard to be going through that. But I knew that my second husband wasn't a ducking asshole like some of you that have responded are. I was older, wiser, and a lot stronger after having done it before. Successful marriages with well-adjusted kids are the real superhero stories. I have no memories of my parents even talking to each other. Just the thought of them standing in the same room together is an aberration in my mind. I often wonder what that must feel like to see parents that look at one another and get along. We don't get to go back and redo that part of our childhood either. What we see as normal as a kid stays with us. What you and your husband have really given your daughter is something more valuable than will be apparent to her for a while. It's not having to wonder about these things and not wishing she could go back and fix them. You've given her something that not even time can take away. Well said. My parents ducking hated each other for for as long as I can remember. My dad always says no. There was a time that we got along, and I am like, well, that's nice, but I've never seen it. When I see friends whose parents are still together, or meet people who say their parents still get along, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. For me, that strangest part is when my girlfriend or other friends of me still at age 25-35 call their parents when they have a problem or if they are really sad. I mean, of course they are adults and they could solve their problems alone, but they just want the love and security of a family to calm them down and make them feel better. For me, this is the last thing I would ever do, especially when I feel vulnerable or sad. I keep away from my family because I learned as a child that showing emotions around them makes me vulnerable and will eventually lead to more pain and sadness, because there was always nothing but fighting and hatred in our family. The fact that the first impulse when they are sad is to run into the loving arms of a family is still such a strange concept to me. Up to this date, I still feel uncomfortable when I attend family meetings or Christmas parties of my GF's family because everyone is so nice and supportive and I just can't bear it for some reason. I feel like this is abnormal and feel like there will be an emotional sucker punch coming at me any moment as soon as I open myself to this positiveness. I will never be able to fully enjoy the warmth of a loving family except for maybe my own. Should I be able to do it better than my family? Because of this, showing your children that a family means support and love is invaluable and will be far more worth than anything money can buy. I can assure you that from experience. My family has always been emotionally neglectful and manipulative and has made me work through all my problems on my own. When I was with my ex, her mother was actually trying to be supportive and help her out in life, but to me it seemed like she was being overly controlling and strict. We kept getting into fights about it because I just could not comprehend the concept of a family that gets involved in your life out of love rather than manipulation. It's made me realize how ducked up my worldview is because of my family, and I deeply regret it now. 34 years married here. Our lowest point was when our 9-year-old son was hit by a car. I went into a deep depression after his death and couldn't cope. It really brought out the worst in both of us. We handled it differently and really struggled to make sense of it all. It was a few really tough years, but we stayed together and tried to work through it all. My husband finally recognized my behaviors and lack of interest in anything, including the fact I left my job as depression and found me professional help. It was a long road, but we made it through and grew closer after. When things go bad, you have to really fight to hold a marriage together, but it's worth it. Don't give up. 21 years this July. I think it's a mix of good times and bad times. Honestly, the worst moments happen when money's been scarce. That brings the worst out of people. We actually separated once about 9 years ago. We were arguing nonstop and my wife ended up feeling trapped and decided to move out with our youngest. We got over it by working on ourselves and rekindling our relationship. Took several months to fix it. On my side, sometimes I too feel trapped for some reasons, like pulling too much weight at home, being the one taking care of more stuff than her. But in the end it's just stupid things. If I left, I don't think I'd ever get what I have now. A marriage is not roses always. It takes a lot of effort, compromising, respect, and communication, and lots of sex. Not joking. I left the Mormon church. For Mormons that frequently means divorce. Temple marriage and the priesthood are a big deal, and she assumed that if I was leaving the church it meant I was leaving her too. It was incredibly stressful. I had been pretending to believe since we got married, and I figured finally telling her all my feelings would actually make her leave me. After all, no more eternal marriage, broken covenants, inactive father to our children. How would she be treated by neighbors, family, other members, etc.? I was working 2 poor jobs at the time and in college. We were barely scraping by even with a good deal on our rent. I was always stressed and often gone. Our families weren't supportive about my decision. Our neighbors judged. My wife was judged and pitied on every Sunday she went alone. I didn't leave her and I never planned to. She didn't leave me. My wife respected my choices, supported me, and ultimately she ended up leaving too. A few years ago now, I was at the lowest point I had ever been in my life due to the church, and leaving it was the best thing I ever did for myself. It will be 14 years married and 16 years together this year. We're happy, we're doing well, and our children are thriving. Those families I've known who left say their marriage is better without the church in their home. I've always been inactive Jack Mormon and cringe thinking of what my life would have been like had my parents been more active. As an adult, I am very atheist agnostic. To this day, my mom says my greatest failure was not raising you kids in the church. My family thinks I don't receive blessings, but look at my amazing adult children now. They are my greatest blessing, and she is right. Your kids will thrive thrive. It's definitely hardest for my mom, she believes, because, hey, that's what the church teaches, that she's effectively a failure since her family will no longer be together in the afterlife. So she failed as a mother. She constantly blames herself and wishes she would have done more scripture reading, more testimony telling, more temple, EFY, forced the mission sooner, etc. She confided much of this to my wife when I left, but never spoke to me about it. Years and years later, she still hasn't. Married to M for over 25 years. When my son was 10, he got diagnosed with a brain condition. I became obsessed with taking care of him. 3 years later, he was diagnosed as stable, and it was the first time I felt he wouldn't need surgery. That's when I realized how neglectful I had been to my husband. He was kind. He still loved me, but he thought I didn't love him anymore. We separated for a while, but every time I brought up divorce, he would say I wanted him to move back, but he would say to give him time. We didn't talk for about 2 months, and then he contacted me, begging for my forgiveness. We began to date again. Eventually, he moved back home. I am telling the facts, but the emotions were flying high. While apart, we would talk for hours on the phone. We became closer and got to know each other really well again. It was a painful refresher class. I hope we never take each other for granted again. Married almost 14 years. Having babies was not good for our relationship. We had 3 kids in quick succession. My hormones were out of whack for about 5 years, and he wasn't great dealing with small kids. There were times when I was counting down the days until I could go back to work and save enough money to leave, and I caught him googling divorce statistics and how to get a divorce. We worked through it, even on our worst days. Even when I wanted out, I just kept thinking how much I'd rather have him in my life than out of it. I don't know why he decided to stay, and even though 2020 was rough financially, he was laid off twice and I wasn't working much. It actually seemed to bring us closer. I am so glad that we stuck it out. Things are never going to be perfect, but I am very grateful to have him. I've been married 17 years now. I can truly say I have never felt that my marriage was on the ropes. I have moved in my marriage with a simple rule. When my wife comes to me with an issue, I take the time to listen to her issue and hold back any sort of, well, you do this or you do that. Anytime I would get offensive when she would bring up an issue that resulted in bigger and bigger arguments. This often led to fights. The simple truth is to allow each other the freedom to bring up things that bother each other without fear that it will get turned around on yourself. This reply is almost exactly the ground reason why I fear a divorce is coming soon. Me and my husband don't talk anymore because every time I try to get any comfort from him, I get stuff like, just get over it. It's not that bad. Just let it go. Stop thinking about it. I never feel like he's listening to me. No matter how often I try to tell him that those words are not working, instead making me feel worse. He often criticizes me, but when I try to point something out to him, he turns it around on me or gets very defensive. I am really glad you both do have the understanding of this. Reading through this thread on what makes relationships work only further makes me realize how bad it's going in mine. For what it's worth, my husband and I were in this same spot about 10 years ago. Neither of us hurt the other. Any attempt at talking led to arguing. Both of us were pretty consumed with how much worse it was for ourselves, with just how drained we were. Couldn't seem to move past it. Resentment built and it was really bad for a few years. Obviously this is a super Cliff Notes version of what went down. It was a truly miserable time. Neither of us can tell you how we got through it. We just let go of the resentments, try to listen, hear each other without making ourselves out to be in a competition for the biggest victim of the relationship. It took a lot of time, but we are still together. It's our 13th anniversary in a month. We still argue sometimes, but we worked hard together to get in a good place in our relationship. Married for 14 years this summer. About 2 years ago, I realized that while I was trying to pull my wife out of depression, I slipped into it myself. There was a lot of resentment over a specific decision she had made years ago without my knowledge or input that affected us both. The resentment boiled to the surface when she wanted to undo that decision again without my input, but with my funding. This, coupled with months of non-stop arguing, culminated in a 2-hour-long marriage counseling session where the counselor looked her in the eyes and told her that if I walked away, he would understand completely. We have 4 kids. I wanted out of the relationship but couldn't find a way to do that without losing my kids or destroying their lives. I resigned myself to a life of depression and disappointment. After a year of that garbage, we got our shit together and really improved things. We were able to focus on us more than the kids were once, and things look stable right now. There are bumps in the road, but it has looked a lot worse. Can you go into more detail on how she dealt with the very direct statement from the counselor? She was shocked, speechless, a very very rare thing for her. She had assumed that all the problems were with me. She lacks the ability to look inward and try to see the perspectives of others. I think it was a wake-up call that she isn't perfect and she put me through a lot more than what she said I was putting her through. The counseling was her idea. I think she thought it would be a 2-hour pounding session on me, but she ended up bearing the brunt of it. I think the brutal honesty snapped her out of her bubble. She is a child from a broken home with a lot of PTSD involved. I gave her a lot of slack because of it. I think it took an outside opinion to make her realize that she was taking her pain out on me. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.